I had always loved road trips. Something about the endless highways, the freedom of the open road, and the quiet solitude of long drives gave me a kind of peace I couldn't find anywhere else. In the summer of 2018, I decided to drive alone from El Paso, Texas, to Phoenix, Arizona. It was supposed to be a simple overnight drive, 7 hours, mostly desert roads, and then I'd stay with my sister in Phoenix for a few weeks. I remember leaving El Paso late in the evening, around 9:30 p.m. My car was freshly fueled, the trunk packed with snacks, water, and a spare tire. I thought I had everything covered. But anyone who has driven through the Southwest knows the kind of darkness the desert has at night. It isn't like city darkness with streetlights in the distance, or even country darkness with the occasional farmhouse glow. It's absolute, endless black. The stars overhead feel like pinholes in a massive, suffocating void. I kept the radio on low for company, but after about an hour, I noticed the signal getting weaker until it turned into static. That didn't surprise me. Cell service and radio signals disappear fast in those desert stretches. I switched it off and just let the hum of the tires on the road keep me company. By midnight, I had driven over 3 hours and hadn't passed another car for almost an hour. That was when I saw him. At first, I thought it was my tired eyes playing tricks on me. In the distance, illuminated faintly by my high beams, was the shape of a man standing at the side of the road. My stomach tightened immediately. What was someone doing out here at this hour, in the middle of nowhere? As I got closer, I saw more details. He was tall, easily over 6 feet. He wore a dusty, oversized coat that looked heavy, almost like something meant for winter, even though the night air outside was still warm, at least 90 degrees Fahrenheit. On his head was a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face completely. He wasn't waving, wasn't signaling for help. He was just standing perfectly still, facing the road as if he had been waiting for me. Something inside me screamed not to stop. My instincts told me something was very wrong, but as I approached, I still slowed down. Maybe it was guilt. What if he was stranded? People die in deserts from dehydration in hours. I rolled my window down slightly, my hand hovering near the lock button. When my headlights fell fully on him, I saw his face. Or rather, I saw the absence of life in it. His skin looked pale and dry like ash. His eyes, God, I still remember them. They caught the glare of my headlights and reflected back, glowing faintly, like the way a dog's eyes catch the light at night. But these weren't the eyes of an animal. They were human, cold, dead. I pressed my foot hard on the accelerator, passing him quickly. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't dare look back right away, but after a few seconds, I glanced at the rearview mirror. What I saw nearly made me lose control of the car. He wasn't standing by the roadside anymore. He was running. Not jogging, not stumbling like a desperate hitchhiker. He was sprinting faster than I thought a human body could move, keeping up with me even though I was already going 70 miles per hour. I pressed harder on the gas, 75, 80, 85. The car shook lightly, the desert highway blurring around me, but in the mirror, I still saw him. His long coat flapped violently, but his stride was unnatural, smooth and steady, like his feet barely touched the ground. His hat had flown off, but his face, pale, twisted into a grim, expressionless mask, remained locked on me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Sweat dripped into my eyes, blurring my vision, but I didn't dare blink. For miles, he stayed behind me, sometimes vanishing into the shadows, only to appear closer again, as if the desert itself was helping him keep pace. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he was gone. 1 second, he was right behind my car, maybe 30 feet away. The next, the desert was empty. My headlights illuminated nothing but endless asphalt and sagebrush. I drove another half hour before I even slowed down, too terrified to believe I was safe. Finally, I reached a small gas station on the outskirts of Phoenix around 3:30 a.m. I pulled in, shaking, exhausted, and stumbled inside. The clerk, a man in his late 40s, looked at me like I had just crawled out of the desert myself. "Rough drive?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I nodded, still pale, and finally said, I think someone tried to chase me. Out there, a man on the road. He ran after my car. The clerk went silent for a long moment, his face suddenly serious. Then he sighed, as if he had heard this before. You saw him too, huh? I stared at him. What do you mean too? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Truckers, travelers, folks who take that stretch at night. They talk about a hitchhiker. Tall man, old coat, hat. Some say he died hitchhiking in the 70s. Got hit by a car and left to rot in the desert. Others say he ain't human at all, something older, something that belongs to the land. Whoever he is, he runs. Runs faster than anyone alive. I felt my stomach drop. My mouth went dry. The clerk gave me a half smile that wasn't really a smile at all. Best advice? Don't ever stop for him. Don't ever look back. To this day, I have never driven that stretch of desert again at night. And I pray I never see that pale, running figure in my mirror again. I grew up in Las Vegas, where the city lights drown out the night sky, and the desert is something most people ignore. Tourists see it as empty land you pass through on your way to casinos, but if you've ever stood in the middle of it, away from the noise, you know it's alive in a way that's hard to explain. In 2015, my cousin Daniel and I decided to go camping in the Nevada desert. We were both in our 20s, restless, and thought it would be fun to get away from the city for a weekend. Daniel was more adventurous than I was. He'd always wanted to test himself, to see how it felt to be cut off from everything. He convinced me that we didn't need a campground, just a tent, some food, and water. We drove out on a Friday afternoon, taking his old pickup truck off the highway and onto a series of dirt trails that seemed to go on forever. By the time we stopped, we were between two rocky hills in a wide sandy valley. There were no towns, no other cars, no signs of life. Just desert stretching endlessly in every direction. I remember setting up the tent as the sun dipped low, turning the sky blood red and orange. The silence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. No traffic, no airplanes, no hum of electricity, just the faint sound of wind moving across the sand. At first, it was peaceful. We cooked some food on a small camp stove, sat by a weak little fire, and talked about life. By the time the stars came out, it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. I've never seen stars so bright. They covered the sky like silver dust. It was past midnight when we decided to sleep. The desert had grown colder, but the air was still and heavy. I crawled into the tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag, and drifted off quickly. Sometime later, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The tent was dark, Daniel's breathing steady beside me. Then I realized I was hearing something. A whisper. It was faint, almost like the rustle of dry leaves, but there were no trees, no bushes. The whisper grew clearer. It wasn't one voice, it was many. A chorus of soft, overlapping voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Some fast, some slow, all of them layered together like a strange, broken song. I held my breath, listening. My first thought was that it had to be people, maybe other campers nearby. But there had been no sign of anyone for miles, and the voices weren't coming from one direction. They seemed to circle the tent, moving, weaving, like a crowd walking slowly around us. I shook Daniel awake, my heart hammering in my chest. He groaned but opened his eyes. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. At first, he looked annoyed, but then I saw his face change. He heard it too. He sat up, listening, his eyes wide in the dim light of the tent. The whispers grew louder, clearer. I could almost pick out individual tones, some high-pitched, others low and guttural. But the words never made sense, like a language older than anything I'd heard. We stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then came the sound of footsteps. Soft, crunching in the sand. Someone, or something, was walking outside. Daniel grabbed the flashlight, his hands shaking. He slowly unzipped the tent, just enough to shine the beam outside. The circle of light swept across the sand and rocks. Nothing. Empty. But the moment he turned the flashlight off, the whispers returned. Louder, closer, pressing against the thin fabric of the tent. I felt something then, an emotion that wasn't mine. Sadness, fear, desperation. It washed over me like a wave, and I suddenly thought of people wandering the desert, lost and dying of thirst, their last words carried away by the wind. Neither of us spoke the rest of the night. We sat there in silence, clutching the flashlight, listening to the voices fade in and out like a tide. Sometimes they were right at the edge of the tent, almost inside with us. Other times they drifted farther, only to return again. When the first pale light of dawn finally crept into the tent, the whispers stopped. Gone, like they had never been there at all. We packed up quickly, not speaking, and drove back to the highway in silence. It wasn't until we reached town that Daniel finally said, "I don't think we should tell anyone." I nodded. We didn't need to. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I spoke to an older native man who ran a small store near the outskirts of the desert. I mentioned what had happened carefully, so he wouldn't think I was crazy. He listened without interrupting, then finally said, "The desert remembers. People die out there all the time. Some from heat, some from hunger, some just lost. Their voices don't always leave. Especially in the valleys, where the wind has nowhere to go. That's where the spirits walk." I asked him if they were dangerous. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "They don't want to hurt you. They just don't want to be forgotten." I never went camping in the desert again. But sometimes, when I drive past those valleys, I roll down my window and listen. And in the emptiness, if the night is still, I swear I can hear them again. The voices in the sand, whispering, calling, reminding me that the desert is never truly silent. It was the summer of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, when I found myself driving alone through New Mexico. I had left Albuquerque late in the evening, heading east toward Texas. My plan was to make it to Amarillo by dawn, but as with most road trips I've taken, I underestimated the distance and overestimated my ability to stay alert through long, empty highways. By midnight, I was already regretting my decision. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of black sand and brush under the faint glow of the stars. My headlights carved out a narrow tunnel of light, but beyond that, there was only darkness. The road felt forgotten, like no one had driven it for years. Worse, my gas gauge had sunk lower than I realized. I was in the red, with maybe 30 miles left before I'd be stranded. Panic set in fast. I hadn't seen a gas station since the last small town an hour ago, and there were no signs promising one ahead. I gripped the wheel tighter, leaning forward like that would somehow help me spot something. My heart raced with each passing mile. I kept imagining my car sputtering to a stop, leaving me stranded in the middle of the desert night, with no service and no one to help. Then, just when I was about to lose hope, I saw it, a glow in the distance. At first, I thought it was another car, but as I got closer, the glow became steadier, brighter, until I recognized the familiar sight of a gas station. Relief washed over me so strong I almost laughed. The station looked small, old-fashioned. A tall sign rose above it, buzzing faintly with a half-lit neon logo. The building itself was worn but standing, painted a pale color that had long since chipped under the desert sun. The pumps looked outdated, but they had lights on, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. I pulled in quickly, my tires crunching on the gravel. There was only one other vehicle there, an old rusted sedan parked off to the side, its windows so dark I couldn't see inside. The air felt different as soon as I stepped out of the car. Heavy, stale. The desert night had been silent before, but here there was a hum, like faint electricity, or the echo of something unseen. I walked into the station. The door creaked loudly, the bell above it ringing as if it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing faintly. Rows of dusty shelves held old snacks, faded magazines, and bottled drinks. Behind the counter sat an elderly man. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes. I noticed them right away. They were cloudy, milky, like the eyes of someone nearly blind. He didn't smile or greet me. He just stared. I cleared my throat and said, "Pump 2, please." My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. The old man nodded slowly. No words, just that strange, stiff nod. His gaze never left me. I paid quickly, uncomfortable under his stare, then walked back outside to pump the gas. The nozzle worked fine, though the numbers on the pump screen barely lit up, the old digital display struggling to keep up. As the tank filled, I glanced back at the station. For a moment, I thought I saw movement inside, shadows shifting on the walls, even though no one else was there. I shook it off, told myself I was just tired, and went to use the restroom on the side of the building before leaving. That was my mistake. The restroom was dim, the mirror cracked, the faucet dripping steadily. I washed my hands quickly, my nerves on edge. When I stepped back outside, everything had changed. The lights were gone. The neon sign above the station was dark. The pumps were rusted, their hoses torn and hanging uselessly. The windows of the building were shattered, and the shelves inside were broken, covered in dust. The entire gas station looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in decades. My heart stopped. My car was still there, the nozzle still in the tank, but the place around me was dead. I stumbled back, staring at the pumps. My mind raced. I had just paid for gas. I had just spoken to someone. I had seen lights. How could everything be rotted and broken now? Fear took over, and I yanked the nozzle out, jumping into my car. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. For the next 30 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the old sedan following me, or the pale-eyed man standing on the side of the road. But the desert was empty, the highway stretching endlessly forward. When I finally rolled into a real town around dawn, I pulled into a modern gas station, just to catch my breath. I told the clerk inside what had happened, my voice trembling, my hands still shaking. He went pale as I described the old building, the flickering sign, the man behind the counter. Finally, he said, "That station burned down in 1983. The owner, Old Man Wilkins, died in the fire. Nobody's run it since." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible. I was just there. I filled up my tank." The clerk shook his head slowly. "You're not the first to say that. People see it sometimes. Travelers late at night. They stop for gas, even talk to the old man. But it's not really there. It never is." I didn't know what to say. I walked back out to my car, terrified to check the gas gauge. But when I looked, my tank was full. I never figured out what I put in my car that night. All I know is, it was enough to get me to Texas. But I swore to myself I'd never stop at a lonely desert station again, no matter how desperate I was. Because sometimes, the place you stop for help doesn't really exist. And sometimes, the person who serves you hasn't been alive for a very long time. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And remember, not every shadow is empty, and not every voice in the dark is in your head. Good night, and stay safe.